Welcome back to the channel. Previously in part 1, we were introduced to Ethan Cole, the mysterious billionaire of Lagos. Powerful, silent, and emotionally guarded. His past was shaped by trauma, growing up in a household ruled by fear and control. Despite his wealth, Ethan lived in solitude, avoiding love and vulnerability. But everything changed when his only friend Greg came to him desperate and in debt. Ethan offered help on one condition. He wanted to marry Greg's sister, Clare. What started as a deal began to unfold into something deeper. Now, in part 2, Clare steps into Ethan's cold, luxurious world and begins to discover the man beneath the silence. Stay tuned, it's about to get intense. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Clare stepped into Ethan's penthouse for the first time as his wife, the title fitting her like an oversized coat, heavy and unfamiliar. The staff greeted her with robotic efficiency, their eyes trained not to linger. Everything felt calculated. The glass walls, the imported marble, even the silence. Clare wasn't expecting warmth, but she hadn't anticipated this level of detachment either. Ethan gave her a brief tour, his voice calm and devoid of emotion. "This is your space," he said, pointing to a room across from his. "Not our space. Hers." At night, Clare lay awake in a bed that felt more like a showroom piece than something to rest in. She could hear Ethan moving in the kitchen below, the clink of porcelain and the low hum of jazz. She wondered if he ever truly slept, or if silence was the only lullaby he trusted. The scent of cedar and something darker clung to the sheets, anchoring her thoughts to the man who had just altered the course of her life. She tried not to think about what this marriage meant, but her mind kept circling back to one truth. She had said yes, and that meant she was in it for better or for worse. Days passed like fog. Ethan's presence was as quiet as a shadow, never intrusive, never absent. He'd leave handwritten notes. "Dinner is in the warmer. I hope you like the book. The hibiscus tea is stocked." Clare didn't know what to do with his gentleness. It wasn't affection, but it wasn't indifference either. It was as though Ethan had built a cage with gold bars and then handed her the key. And despite everything, she didn't feel trapped. Not yet. The discovery came on a Wednesday when Clare wandered the penthouse halls alone, trailing her fingers along the cold steel and glass. She had passed it twice already, a narrow wooden door nearly hidden beside a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf. This time she opened it. The scent of aged mahogany and something faintly floral drifted out. Inside was a room unlike the rest of the penthouse, warmer, older, almost haunted. At its center stood a black upright piano, dustless yet untouched. A single chair sat nearby, angled as though someone had recently left in silence. Clare stepped in slowly, her heels muted by the Persian rug. The air felt sacred. She ran her fingers over the keys, and one responded with a soft, aching note. Behind her, a voice spoke. "I didn't think you'd find this room so soon." Ethan leaned against the doorway, not angry, but unreadable. She turned, heart pounding. "Why is it hidden?" He stepped forward, eyes locked on the piano. "It belonged to my mother. She taught me until she stopped playing." Clare saw it then, grief, buried but not forgotten, behind his perfectly sculpted calm. He didn't play that night, but he sat beside her on the piano bench and told her things she hadn't expected. How his mother used to sing lullabies in Igbo, how she smelled of cinnamon and always wore yellow. "After my father died," he said, "I tried to play again, but it felt like betrayal." Clare didn't speak. She simply placed her hand over his on the keys. He didn't pull away. In that moment, silence was no longer their barrier, it became the bridge. For the first time since their wedding, Clare didn't feel like a stranger in Ethan Cole's world. She felt like a note in a song long buried. Clare was making breakfast when her phone buzzed violently. Dozens of missed calls and even more messages. Her screen lit up with one link, forwarded again and again. The mysterious Mrs. Cole, marriage or merger. The article had everything: grainy photos of their wedding day, anonymous quotes, speculation about Ethan's sexuality, and cruel commentary about Clare's looks, background, and supposed ambition. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. A beauty with no pedigree, one line read. A strategic pawn in Lagos's most silent empire, another claimed. By the time Ethan entered the kitchen, dressed in a black turtleneck and gray slacks, the air was ice. Claire didn't look up from her tea. "Did you know this would happen?" she asked. He said nothing for a moment. Then, yes. She finally met his gaze. "And you didn't warn me?" He walked over and gently turned her phone face down on the counter. "Because you don't owe them an explanation, and neither do I." His calm made her angrier. "I'm not asking for an explanation," she snapped. "I'm asking for humanity. You dragged me into your life, Ethan. The least you could do is protect me." Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't guilt. It was fury, but not at her. That afternoon, Ethan posted something to his rarely used Instagram, a black and white photo of Claire on their balcony, laughing softly in a robe, unaware of the camera. The caption was simple: "Peace looks like her." It went viral within hours. No more rumors, just awe. The world finally saw what he saw, and when Claire stood beside him that night, watching the city lights flicker beneath them, she felt it not publicity, not power, but a strange, growing warmth, and it terrified her more than any headline ever could. It had been weeks since the storm of media noise quieted, but something still lingered in the air, unspoken tension, like the calm before a different kind of weather. Claire had begun settling into the rhythm of life with Ethan, though settling was generous. He still disappeared for long hours and returned with unreadable eyes. But he was trying. Small gestures proved it. The custom books delivered to her room, the tea always stocked just the way she liked, and the new key she found in her drawer, one that opened the piano room. One afternoon, while Ethan was away on business, Claire opened the door to find someone she hadn't seen in over a year. Jordan, her ex. Lean, smooth-talking, and dangerous in the way all charming men with empty hearts are. He stood in the hallway like he belonged there. "Nice place," he said with a grin. "So it's true. Little Claire married Lagos' silent king." Claire's body froze. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. Jordan leaned in, voice low and slick. "Just checking if the price of loyalty is still 80 million naira, or if it's gone up," he winked. "Tell Ethan I said hello." That night, Claire told Ethan everything. Wasn't explosive. His reaction wasn't explosive. It was cold, calculated, dangerous. "How did he find you?" he asked quietly. Claire hesitated. "Greg," she admitted. "He and Jordan, they used to run things together." Ethan nodded once, then walked to the window. "No one threatens what's mine," he said. Claire bristled. "I'm not property, Ethan." He turned, eyes sharp. "No, you're a line I will never let them cross." For the first time Claire saw it, Ethan wasn't just silent. He was strategic. And now she wasn't just his wife. She was his motive. And someone had made a very dangerous mistake. It began innocently enough. Claire had been searching for a charging cable in Ethan's study, a sleek space lined with books, soft leather, and silence. The bottom drawer of his desk was locked, the only one in the entire penthouse that hadn't yielded to her gentle curiosity. And that alone made her suspicious. She stared at it for a moment before trying the smallest of the piano room keys. To her surprise, it clicked. Slowly, carefully, she opened it, and what she found made her breath catch. Inside were photos old, faded, and painful. A woman smiling in yellow, her arms around a much younger Ethan. His mother. But there were others, press clippings, funeral pamphlets, and one envelope marked confidential. It contained a police report, domestic abuse, hospital visits. And then Claire saw a faded child's drawing, signed with shaky crayon. "I wish my daddy would disappear." Her throat tightened. This wasn't just a man raised by a tyrant. This was a boy who had wished for freedom, and when he got it, it came through death. The report suggested that Chief Douglas Cole's heart attack wasn't so natural after all. When Ethan came home that evening, Claire was waiting, not angry, but hollow. "Did you kill him?" she asked softly. Ethan froze mid-step. He didn't deny it. He just looked at her for a long time before replying, "I protected the only person I loved." The silence between them was louder than any fight. "And who protects you now?" she whispered. He didn't answer. That night, they lay in the same bed for the first time, backs to each other. Claire didn't know what scared her more, what Ethan had done, or the fact that, deep down, she understood why he did it. Claire no longer tiptoed through the penthouse. She moved freely now, not out of comfort, but because the mystery had changed. Ethan wasn't an enigma anymore. He was a man with ghosts folded into every quiet corner of his world. She watched him more closely. The way he stared at the rain for too long, the subtle tension in his shoulders when his phone rang. The way he avoided certain dates on the calendar like they were cursed. She realized something that frightened her. He wasn't detached, he was exhausted. Not by the world, but by what he carried in silence. They had dinner together more often now. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. But the silence between them had softened. One night after an unusually quiet meal, Claire asked, "Do you ever miss him, your father?" Ethan looked up slowly, his fork halfway to his mouth. "No," he said, "but I miss the version of me that believed he could change." Claire nodded. She understood that. There was a version of herself that believed love alone could save people. That version had died when Jordan left her bruised and blaming herself. Later that night, Ethan came to the piano room. Claire was already there, sitting in the dark, fingers ghosting over the keys. He stood behind her for a long moment before saying, "You've made this place quieter." In a good way. She looked back at him, not smiling, just seeing him really seeing him. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself," she said. "You survived. That's enough." For the first time, Ethan didn't reply. He simply walked over, sat beside her, and played a single, trembling note. It wasn't beautiful, but it was honest, and in that moment, it was more than enough. The first threat came in silence, just like Ethan. A white envelope slid under the penthouse door. No stamp, no handwriting, just a memory card inside. Claire found it first. She handed it to Ethan without a word, watching his jaw tighten as he inserted it into his laptop. The screen flickered. Then, images. Jordan, Greg, a warehouse in Apapa, men exchanging duffel bags, money, arms, and in the corner of one frame, blurry but unmistakable, Ethan's name scrawled on a ledger. It was a message, not a threat. Blackmail dressed in digital ink. Someone wanted something. Ethan called Benjamin immediately. "Find out who touched that footage," he said, his voice low and hard. Claire stood in the doorway, arms folded. "What is it?" He turned to her. "They want me out of the way. This is pressure. And Greg's not just drowning, he's dragging me under with him." Claire's breath caught. "And what do we do?" Ethan looked at her, a storm behind his eyes. "We fight quietly." For the first time, Claire realized the extent of his power, not in wealth, but in precision. He didn't panic. He planned. And in that moment, she didn't feel like his wife. She felt like his partner. That night, Ethan left. No explanation. Just a note. "Stay inside. Lock the doors. Don't call anyone but me." Claire obeyed, but her nerves buzzed like a live wire. Hours passed. The city beyond the windows pulsed with heat and shadow. When he returned, his knuckles were bruised, and his shirt was streaked with something dark. He said nothing, just walked past her and into the shower. When he emerged, he stood by the piano and whispered, "They won't touch us again." Claire watched him in silence. She should have been afraid, but instead she felt something scarier. She felt safe. Claire had never been the kind of woman who waited on the sidelines, even if the world expected her to. And now, with danger slinking through every crack of their lives, she couldn't afford to be just Ethan's piece. She needed to be his shield too. While Ethan tightened security, Claire began asking questions. Quietly, carefully. She started with Benjamin, Ethan's right hand polished, loyal and impossibly tight-lipped. But Claire had something he couldn't resist: sincerity. "I don't want to get in the way," she told him. "I just want to know how to keep him alive." Benjamin finally relented, giving her names she shouldn't have had and histories Ethan had tried to bury. Men in suits with clean records but blood on their hands. Corporations laundering cash through diamond exports. Deals brokered in back rooms of Ikoyi lounges. She wrote everything down, connecting dots like a journalist chasing a headline. The more she learned, the clearer the picture became. Ethan wasn't just wealthy, he was a threat to men who'd never known fear. And Greg had become their entry point. Her brother, as usual, was playing a game he didn't understand. One afternoon, Claire followed Greg. She watched him exchange a small USB for a thick envelope in a back alley behind a cafe. Her heart cracked. He hadn't changed. He was still trading pieces of her life for scraps of his own. That night, she confronted him at her old flat in Yaba. "You sold him out," she said, her voice calm but firm. Greg's guilt was written in sweat. "I didn't mean to," he muttered. "I thought I was in control." Claire didn't raise her voice. She just whispered, "You never were." And when she left, she took the USB with her and the last bit of love she had for him. Claire handed Ethan the USB that night, placing it gently on his desk as if it were a loaded weapon. "Greg's still working with them," she said, "and I think they're planning something bigger." Ethan didn't ask how she knew. He just stared at the device like it confirmed what he already suspected. "You shouldn't have gone alone," he said after a long silence. "You could have been hurt." Claire stepped closer. "I'm not afraid of being hurt. I'm afraid of losing you and not understanding why." Ethan looked up at her, something shifting behind his normally unreadable eyes. "Then you deserve to see it all." He opened a hidden drawer behind the bookcase, a vault built into the wall. Inside was a blueprint of Cole Holdings Tower and a thick dossier with photos, names, wire transfers, and surveillance stills. It was a war plan. Ethan had been building it for months. "They're not just after my company," he explained. "They want the land under it. It sits on an untapped mineral belt. My father knew it. They've known it. And now they want to force my hand, make me sell or bury me under scandal." Claire sat beside him, piecing it together. "So they use Greg to get to me, to get to you." Ethan nodded. "And they underestimated us." For the first time, he outlined the full scope of his counter-strategy: asset freeze orders, media traps, strategic leaks, even corporate espionage. But what stunned Claire wasn't the complexity. It was that at the center of the plan was her. "They don't think you matter," Ethan said softly. "They think you're just the quiet wife. That's why you'll be the one to deliver the final blow." Claire blinked. "You want me to go public?" Ethan nodded. "With the truth, with the records, with your voice." She didn't answer immediately, but as she looked over the files, her spine straightened. "Then let's end this." Claire stood before the cameras in a navy blue suit, the color sharp against her warm skin and unflinching eyes. The press conference was held at a neutral venue in Victoria Island, one of the most guarded buildings in Lagos that morning. The city buzzed with curiosity. Who was this woman, and what did she have to say that Ethan Cole himself wouldn't? When the microphones turned red and the lights blinked on, Claire stepped forward and told the truth. About the mining belt, the corporate betrayal, the blackmail, and the price of silence. She didn't just speak, she dismantled an empire with grace. Her voice didn't shake, her eyes didn't blink. By the time she presented the documents, leaked emails, bank records, and stolen footage, social media exploded. News anchors scrambled, investigations launched. Names once protected by wealth and political clout were now exposed. Ethan watched from the tower, hands folded, eyes unreadable. When it ended, he didn't call her. He didn't need to. He knew she had done something even he couldn't. She didn't just survive the war. She won it. That night, Claire returned to the penthouse. The lights were low. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. Ethan stood by the piano, waiting, not with a thank you, not with a reward, but with something rarer. Vulnerability. "I built this life to protect myself," he said quietly, "and you walked into it and taught me how to live inside it." Claire stepped closer. "You don't need to hide anymore. Not from me." He took her hand, finally, completely. "Then let's stop surviving, Claire. Let's start living." She smiled, not the careful smile she once wore, a real one. And in that moment, they weren't just survivors. They were architects of something real, something chosen. No longer bound by silence, no longer afraid of love, Ethan and Claire stood not as myths but as man and woman. Power made them feared, but it was love quiet, earned, and unshakable that made them unstoppable.